He is an author and the curator at the Charles M. Schulz Museum and Research Center. His most recent book, which he co-authored, is Charles M. Schulz, The Art and Life of the Peanuts Creator in 100 Objects. We'll explain that title after I welcome Benjamin L. Clark. Benjamin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is a great pleasure, sir. I can't hide my excitement. Schulz, I've been a fan of Peanuts and Charlie Brown and the man Charles Schulz since I was like the age of 4 when I got my first one of these.
Hey, good.
I got a lot of those. I'll have to talk to you off camera about what I should do with them. I'd like to frame them all, to be honest with you. But let's talk about the title, 100 Objects. For our viewers, how did you manage, because I've been to your museum in Santa Rosa, how did you manage to whittle the objects, items down to just 100 to describe the life of Charles Schulz?
Right. Well, we settled on 100 as a number to publish the book in time for Charles Schulz's centennial of his birth, and which is why the number 100 instead of 200 or
Sure.
50 or whatever. And once we settled on a number, there were some things that just immediately sprung to mind. So you start making that list. Well, we have to have this, we have to have that. And with those constraints, you kind of look at the list and kind of go, okay, well, what are we missing from his life? We want a picture of the whole man, not just the cartoonist. So, what are maybe some areas that we need to touch upon and things? And then we start looking for objects to represent different parts of his life. And so that was how we did it.
There are, I don't want to go all Citizen Kane Rosebud here, if you get the reference, but there were some ones that really, out of the 100, that really stood out to me. Again, if you think of that Citizen Kane Rosebud example, one of the items, a couple of them really stood out. One was that his mother, back when he was a young lad growing up in Minnesota, buys him the How to Draw Cartoons book.
Yeah.
Which really stood with him. And I think, Benjamin, I couldn't really choose one, but if I had to choose one item that you did a spotlight on, it would be what he did with integration and the introduction of the African American character, Franklin. I always find a great artist sometimes come up against it, and he was not going to back down on that. So I think if I had to choose one, it'd be that. Explain to our viewers his first touch with integration.
Well, it was in the summer of 1968, and he actually gets a letter from a woman named Harriet Glickman, who actually wrote to several cartoonists and said, things are bad right now. We have to cast our minds back to that summer of 1968, where there was so much racial strife in America, and things were boiling over. We have the assassination of Dr. King. And she writes to these cartoonists and says, basically, if you were to include a black character who is just a normal character, not one of these, awful stereotypes that we've seen on the comics pages in the olden days, that would do a lot of good in the world. And Charles Schulz was very thoughtful about that, and he wrote back to her and said, I've considered this before, and I just don't know how I could do it. I'm not confident I could pull it off in a way that wouldn't come across as patronizing. He says that he just wasn't sure, but he opened up the dialogue with her, and she said, well, can I have a couple of my friends write to you also? Because she was actually Jewish and white, and so she had some other people write to him who were black and were able to express, Charles Schulz, you have so much goodwill in the world. Even if you do come across perhaps imperfectly, isn't it worth trying? And that cemented it for Charles Schulz. That really allowed him to be able to create this character and to give himself the latitude to do it, and to give himself permission to say, okay, I may not get it 100% right out of the gate, but I'm going to try. And I think that is a really important lesson to come away with.
I love the fact that he, as I said in the question, didn't back down. There was some pushback from obviously some newspapers of various parts of the country, but he stood his ground, which, as I said, you often see these great artists do that. it's amazing to me too. He starts in 1950, he's in 7 newspapers. By the time he passes away at a young age in 2000, he's in 2,600 papers. I got to say that I'd like to think that he really is kind of like, in what he did in his world is really, there's a before and after him. The way I would say probably the same thing about Louis Armstrong and jazz. You agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's hardly anyone working in not just comics, but almost in any graphic form today that doesn't point back to Charles Schulz as an influence.
And it's great too because you've got these 100 items, but you also have commentary from his family, his friends, and the worshiping, as you said, of many cartoonists. I want to mention too, before we go, Benjamin, as I said off the top, I was fortunate enough to visit the museum in Santa Rosa. I also love the town of Santa Rosa. I'd say halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco. Tell our viewers a bit about the museum and why they should make the trek if they're in the neighborhood.
Oh, we have a beautiful museum. We have constantly rotating exhibitions, so there's always something new to see, even if you've been before. And of course, we are in Santa Rosa, like you said, right in the heart of California's beautiful wine country, not too far from the coast. You know, it's a beautiful place to visit. And aside from just coming to see us, of course, at the Schulz Museum.
Yeah, I can't recommend it enough, as I said, being a fan. Hey, the book is Charles M. Schulz, The Art and the Life of Peanuts Creator in 100 Objects. Benjamin, you have fulfilled a dream for me. I got to talk to somebody that knew Schulz because as I said, I'm still a fan after all these years. We thank you very much, Benjamin, for joining us here on Our City Tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me.
You're quite welcome.